Welcome to another Inspiration Wednesday. My name is Daryl Fleary with Trivantis, and today we're going to talk about using variables in Lectora. Now, if you've used Lectora for any amount of time, you probably know that there are variables in there. You may have had some trepidation or fear in going after using them, and hopefully what we'll be able to accomplish today is to show you how you can use variables in your title without any programming to do some more interesting things. We'll take a look at sort of how they're structured, what types of variables there are, what a variable really is and what it's doing behind the scenes. And then towards the end of the session, we'll look at some sort of creative uses for variables so you can get an idea of the types of things that you might be able to use them for. When we first start off talking about variables, what I like to do is always begin by just saying, think of a variable as just a bucket. It's just an empty bucket or empty container that you're going to put some information in. That information might be text, it might be numbers, it might be a combination of those as you see here, it could be special characters, it could be spaces, it could be anything. All it is just a bucket that you're going to drop things into as you go through the course, and then later you can look into that bucket and see what's there, and then choose to take some action or take no action depending on what you want to do based on the contents of that bucket. So the way this works, you can put things in the bucket. As your student answers questions, those go into buckets. As they use form objects on the screen, those go into buckets. As they answer tests, all that information goes into buckets. Those buckets are called variables. So don't be alarmed or scared by the word variable. It sounds all technical and highfalutin, as we used to say back in the day, but it's just a bucket. Just think of it as an empty container that you're going to put things into. Now, one thing I want to point out is that variables are global. They pertain to your entire title, which means a variable that you create and use on page 1, you still can look at that bucket, look in there, see what's in there, and use that information on page 101. It doesn't matter. They flow throughout the title for whatever purpose you need. There are two types of variables in Lectora: what we call reserved variables and user-defined variables. Reserved variables are variables that come with Lectora. They are created by Lectora. They cannot be edited. They cannot be removed or deleted. They're available all the time. And they're things like the current date, the current time, the current chapter name, the current title, the number of pages in your title, the number of pages in your chapter, number of pages in your section, etc. These are all things that come with the product that you can use at any time. So for example, you'll notice here at the top of my screen it says two types of variables. That's my page name. Really what's happening here, it's just a blank text block or a placeholder text block on the page, and as we go from page to page there's an action that says change the contents of that text block to be my current page name variable. So that's an example of how you might use reserved variables. We'll look at some others in a second. The other type of variable that you can use is a user-defined variable, or what we also call custom variables. These are variables that you can create for a specific purpose in your title. You give it a name, and the name can be anything you want as long as it does not contain spaces. In fact, I like to start mine with underscores so that they bubble to the top of my variable list alphabetically. But you can name it whatever you want. You can give it an initial value, a starting value. That value can be nothing. It can be 0. It can be a sentence. It could be whatever you want, but it's just a starting place. And depending on your purpose, you'll vary that around. And then you can determine whether you want to keep that value, retain the value when the student logs off. In other words, perhaps you've created a variable to keep count of something. Well, maybe you don't want to keep count of that once they log off. When they come back on in the course, you want to start counting again. So you would not retain the value. Other things you might want to retain the value, etc. So the types of purposes that you might use custom variables or user-defined variables for, some of which are listed here. You might use them for counting. You might use them for doing calculations, moving or resizing objects around on the screen, creating custom questions that are questions that are not your typical true, false, multiple choice type questions, and we'll look at some of those a little bit later in this hour. And of course, creating games and things like that, variables are very useful for that type of thing as well. So you have two types of variables: reserved variables that you cannot change, but you can still look in the bucket, see what value is in those, and use them in some other way. And user-defined variables that you create. Not only can you look in the bucket to see what's in there, but you can also change what's in that bucket. Now there's kind of a third type, or maybe it's a subtype, if you will, of reserved variables, and those are your AICC SCORM variables, or your LMS variables. Anytime you declare that your title is going to be used on an LMS, then you'll get an additional set of variables in your reserved variable list. Now, mind you, these are all named AICC something, but they work for SCORM titles, for Tin Can, etc. We just couldn't name them, or didn't want to name them, with AICC/SCORM/Tin Can/any other LMS you might have variable. Seemed kind of long. So AICC is just your LMS defined variables. And ways you might use those: here's a good example. We have a certificate with a text block on the certificate, and when the certificate is shown, there's an action, much like we do with the current page name here in this presentation. There's an action on the certificate that says pull in or change contents of this text block to the student name. In other words, the name that the LMS is holding for that student. So that's an example of how you might use your AICC or SCORM, or what I like to call just your LMS variables. With your user-defined variables only, you can modify those variable values. So whatever is in the bucket, you can change. You cannot change reserved variables. You cannot change, actually you can in some cases change your AICC variables. That's a little bit far afield. We won't go there today. But in general, when you're changing your user-defined variables, you use the modify variable action. All right, so here we've got a bucket, and right now there's some text in that bucket. And what I want to do now is talk about these modify variable actions. How do I change the contents of what's in the bucket? So with the modify variable action, there are a number of things you can do. The first thing you can do that I'll point out is you can set it as empty. Set as empty is available for all of your user-defined variables, and what it means is clear out the bucket. Doesn't matter what was in there before. Whatever was in there, get rid of it and replace it with nothingness. All right? So it's not null, it's not spaces, it's not zero, it's nothingness. So that's the first thing that you can do with your user-defined variables. The second thing you can do, and what a lot of people will do, is set equal to. Set equal to says, never mind what's in the bucket to begin with. If I choose set equal to, that means get rid of whatever's in the bucket and make the bucket this value. What I like to think of it as my Captain Kirk button, right? Make it so, number one. This says make it so. Whatever you put here, make it so in the bucket. All right, so again, you could have numeric values in your bucket. You could also have alphabetic characters in your bucket. Or you could have both in your bucket. Doesn't matter. All right, so that's set equal to. Set equal to says put this in the bucket, take everything else out, put this in. Set as empty clears out whatever's in the bucket. The other actions have different functions or different capability depending on whether you're dealing with text strings or numeric values. If you have numeric only values in your bucket, let's set our bucket to that, and we add to variable another numeric value, it performs a calculation. Okay, so add, subtract, multiply, and divide will perform mathematical calculations if you have a numeric only value in your bucket. If you're adding or subtracting a text value, add to variable concatenates what's in the bucket. In other words, it adds to the string of whatever's in the bucket. Puts it on the end. So when you add to variable with text, it's going to put it on the end. Once there's any text in your bucket, in other words, once it's no longer a numeric only value, add to variable just puts whatever you're adding on the end. Subtract from variable does the opposite. If it's a non-numeric only value, in other words, there's some text in there, subtract from variable looks into your variable and says, pull out whatever I'm subtracting. So in this case, it's going to pull out 40 out of my bucket. I reached in the bucket and subtracted, took out 40. Okay? If I wanted to remove my name from this bucket, I could subtract from variable. It'll reach in the bucket and pull out the characters D, A, R, Y, and L. Which now, of course, leaves me with a numeric only value, so I could then do other calculations if I wanted to. Okay? So add to variable will perform a math calculation if both pieces are numeric only. Add to variable will add to a string if there's any text. Subtract from variable will perform a mathematic calculation on numeric only values. Subtract from variable will reach in the bucket and pull out those characters if it's a text string. I noticed in the chat it says that was Captain Picard and not Captain Kirk. You're absolutely correct. I apologize for that. Okay. Multiply variable by and divide variable by are mathematic only. And it just takes whatever's in the bucket and multiplies it by whatever value you're saying, or divides it by whatever value you're saying. Round and round down, let me add this to my variable. Okay. What round and round down do, normally when we're rounding numbers, we round up if it's 0.5 or greater, and we round down if it's 0.49, if you will, and lower. So 0.5 up and under 0.5 comes down. That's what round would do. So it would change. If I round this variable, the value that's currently in my bucket, if my action is to round the variable, it will round this, in this case, to 7133. Okay. Now let's do this. Let me add back in, some more values here. What round down will do is, regardless of whether there are any decimal positions at all, it will always take it down to the previous integer, not up. So even though this is 0.9898, round down would take it back down to 7.7133. All right? So round variable and round down have no effect on text strings. They're only for numeric buckets. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide can be used with numeric values. Add and subtract can also be used with text strings. And of course, set equal to and set as empty can be used with both text strings and numeric only variables. So again, depending on what's in your bucket determines how these are going to behave a little bit. As we go through this presentation, you'll notice that I'm showing you different values in the bucket. I want you to begin to sort of visualize what's inside of your buckets, because that's the best way to learn how to use variables, to understand what's actually happening inside that bucket. Okay, so we've got these user-defined variables that we can create, and we can modify them using modify variable actions. We also want to point out that all form objects include variables in them. They automatically have a variable baked into them. So if you have a radio group on your page with buttons of radio 1, radio 2, radio 3, or maybe this is, dog, cat, parrot, whatever it is, there's a variable associated with this radio group, and what it's storing, what it's going to hold as its value, what it's going to put in that radio group bucket, is this label that's associated with these radio buttons. So right now, radio _2 is what would be in my radio group 1 bucket. Now radio _3 is what would be in my radio group 1 bucket, and so on. Checkboxes have variables associated with them as well, and as you might imagine, the value is going to be on or empty. So the checkbox 1 variable right now has a value of on. Checkbox 2 and checkbox 3 have no value. They are empty. And I could have used a set as empty action, if I wanted to, by the way, to force these to be empty. List boxes will show, in this case, this list box would have a value of item 1 in its bucket. If I multi-selected here, that bucket would now have item 1, comma, item 4. That's what would be in that list box variable. Entry fields we sort of just looked at. It's whatever the text is. And drop list, sort of the same thing. So you can see here, this drop list variable would have item 3 in its bucket. So I could choose to do something if drop list 1, for example, equaled item space 3, as you see it written here. So once you understand that all of these things have variables associated with them, then you can go on to do things like we saw before, right? I could take the entry field and put a value in there, and an entry field and the value in there, and my button says multiply the value of variable 1 by the value of variable 2 to get some result. Or we could do it, to calculate shipping days, or to convert statute miles to nautical miles, etc. And maybe you're going to take some action if the nautical miles is greater than 850 and do something different if it's less than 850. Who knows? Whatever scenarios you might dream up. So remember, all form objects have variables baked into them, associated with them. I'll also point out here, you'll notice it says retain value. What that's saying is, when the student logs off of this session, do I want to remember that, in this case, for example, the drop list has item 3 in it? Do I want to clear out the bucket when they log off, or do I want to retain the value of what's in the bucket? And you can also do that on your user-defined variables. Let me just back up here real quick. You'll notice when you create your user-defined variables, you can say, I want to keep this value when the student logs off. All right? That's entirely up to you and depends on the purpose for which you're using a variable. Now, questions are also made up of form objects. So as you probably imagine, questions have a baked-in variable as well. And as you also probably know, what's held in that value is the answer that the student provides to the question. So if this is my question 2 variable, excuse me, and I select this, the value that Lectora is holding in that question 2 variable is this text, feet in 1 yard. If I select this one, it's now holding miles in 1 kilometer. That is the value of the variable. Okay? You guys staying with me on this? So don't be confused or afraid of variables. It's just a bucket that's going to hold some information. In the case of a question, it just holds what the student answered. In the case of a form object, it holds whether or not that checkbox was selected, or whether or not which option was selected in a radio group, etc. Like user-defined variables, you can use modify variable actions to affect these question values as well. So I could modify the value of question 2 to set it as empty if I wanted to. Or I could modify the value of variable 2 to add 27 to it or something, depending on the scenario I might be trying to come up with. So you can do a lot of different things with this. So what I want to look at now is conditions, because probably the biggest use for variables, the reason you use variables a lot of times, is to collect some information in your bucket so that later you can make a choice based on the value that's in that bucket. All right, so let's talk about using variables for action conditions. So right here you'll see I'm still looking at the value that Lectora is holding for what the student answered for question 2 on the previous screen. Right? This is the answer that the student provided. So later, if I wanted to take some action based on how that student answered, maybe show something or hide something or go somewhere, whatever, I would have a condition that says do that if one of these relationships is satisfied. So let's talk a little bit about these relationships. Well, the easiest one to think about for questions is, of course, is correct and is not correct. So I could take some action if question 2 is correct, or take some action if question 2 is not correct. As you saw, miles in 1 kilometer was not correct. So if I had this as my condition, if I had is not correct as my condition, then whatever action I wanted to happen would happen, because question 2 is not correct, and you would be saying do something if question 2 is not correct. So it would do whatever that is. If you wanted to do something if question 2 was correct, this is not correct, so whatever you want to do if it was correct would not happen, because it's not correct. Let's talk a little bit more. So contains. Let's talk about contains. A variable contains everything that is in the bucket. If it's in the bucket, it is contained in the bucket. Whether that's spaces, whether that's punctuation, whether that's capitalization, all of that matters. That's what's in the bucket. So for example, if I wanted to do some action if question 2 contained mile, that action would not occur. It would not occur because I've asked it to see if my bucket contains lowercase m, lowercase I, lowercase l, lowercase e. And you can see if you look in this bucket, it does not contain lowercase m, lowercase I, lowercase l, and lowercase e. It has an uppercase m. So this is not contained, and if contains was what we were looking for, this action would not happen. This is not satisfied. It is not true. Now, if the action I wanted to happen was does not contain mile, then yes, that action would happen, because this does not contain lowercase m, lowercase I, lowercase l, lowercase e. So let's talk about that. I'm going to click on this here. When you're using conditions, Lectora is going to look for exactly what you identify as the value. So if you ask for MILE lowercase and they've entered MILE uppercase, these are not the same, therefore your condition would not be true. So while to you and me all of these say mile, to Lectora they are all different. They are all different. So when you're looking at relationships or conditional actions, if you will, punctuation matters, capitalization matters, spelling matters, everything matters. It's either in the bucket or it's not in the bucket. So once you understand how to look into these buckets, what's really happening, then you can do a lot of creative things with it. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute here. One thing I want to point out, as you're learning here to visualize what's in your buckets, one thing that always helped me is to go ahead and put a text block on your screen and just call it value or something. And have an action on that text block that says, on mouse click, change the contents of that text block to be the value of the variable, whatever variable it is you're trying to keep track of or visualize. That way, at any time, you can just click on it and it'll show you what Lectora is holding as the value of that variable. Another good way to do that, of course, is using debug mode. Unless you're a little more advanced, debug mode tends to frighten people a little bit. So a very easy way is just to have a text block on your page and set that to change the contents to equal the value of the variable that you want to follow. Okay, let's talk a little bit about conditional actions, looking at the action ribbon. And a simple mnemonic that I like to use that helps me remember exactly what I'm doing is do if true. Do if true. What this is saying is whatever my trigger is, on mouse click, on page show, on done playing of my audio, on show of some object, whatever it is, this is saying do this if true. Do if true. So in this case, show rectangle if this is true. In this case, if the radio group 1 contains capital R, lowercase e, lowercase c. Radio group 1 contains capital R, lowercase e, lowercase c. Well, I didn't bother typing out rectangle here. I could have said if radio group 1 is equal to rectangle, but this is the only choice that has REC in it, so I just shortcut it to save myself time, not have to worry about spelling, etc. All right? So do if true. Show this if this is true. Otherwise, do this. So I'm going to show a rectangle, or I'm going to show an ellipse. All right, so right now, if I click Show Shape and run this action, what's going to happen? Am I going to see the rectangle, or will I see the ellipse? Well, let's find out. I got the ellipse. Why did I get the ellipse? Well, I got the ellipse because it said, show the rectangle if my variable contains REC. Well, I didn't pick anything, so it does not contain REC. Therefore, this is not true. Show if true. It wasn't true, so it did something else. You follow? Now, if I select it, now it'll show the rectangle because my variable does contain REC. If I click here, it doesn't, and it shows the ellipse. All right? So there are a couple of ways we could have gotten around it. If we wanted the rectangle to show up to begin with, what could we have done? Well, instead of having one condition that said show the rectangle if radio group contains REC, we could have added a second condition and said show the rectangle if the radio group contains REC or the radio group is empty. I could have used the is empty relationship here as well. And any of those could be true. So if this is true, or this is true, or this, or this, or this, however many conditions you want to put in, and I believe you can put in up to 50 of them, if any of those conditions are true, then take the action. So that's one way that we could have gotten the rectangle to show up right away when these were both blank. All right, so remember, do if true. Do this if it's true. If it's not true, then it may do nothing, or you may ask it to do something else. Entirely up to you. So keep that in mind. Do if true. So now what I want to do is look at some examples of how we're using variables and titles, just different things you can do with them, and kind of make sure you're clear on all this. And then we'll go into Lectora and actually look at the AWT file. Okay, so here's a question. Again, I'm showing you what's in the bucket right now. So right now there's nothing in the bucket. And it says, click the button that represents the color of the traffic light in cases where you must stop at the intersection. Well, we all know you must stop at a red light. So I'm going to click that. When I click that, you'll notice it put red into my bucket. And of course, when I submit, I get that question correct. If I click here, it's putting yellow in the bucket. If it's here, it puts green in the bucket. So all I have to do that, the way I'm doing that, is I have an action that says when I click the red button, change the contents of my question variable, set it equal to red. Make it red. If I click yellow, set it to yellow. If I click green, set it to green. Those are the same three choices I have in my multiple choice question. So I've got a multiple choice question. That's all this is, only instead of showing the radio buttons for them to pick the choices, I'm forcing the value in by changing the contents of the variable. So this, you'll notice, is doing the exact same thing, forcing in a value, same as if I were picking the radio button. That's all we're doing. It's a multiple choice question on the page, only instead of showing this, I'm showing this and using these buttons to force a value into the bucket. So there's a use for variables for you. In this case, all we did was change the contents of our question2 variable, or whatever the question variable was for this one. Okay. Another question we get often is, how can I do a multi-blank fill-in-the-blank question? Well, I'm betting you guys can guess now how easy that is to do. Here's a multi-blank fill-in-the-blank question. I laid it on top of an image instead of laying the blanks out on the page or spacing my text out so I could lay the blanks inside the text. But basically I'm asking, what are the three colors of the Texas state flag? Well, the three colors are red, white, and blue. Now, that's incorrect. Why? Because the way I asked this question was not just asking what are the colors, but actually I wanted them to identify where the colors go. But you'll see in my question variable, it put in the first field and the second field and the third field. All right? Let's get this correct. Blue, white, and red. Good. That's great. And you'll see that's what's in the variable. So let's take a look at that. Again, we did the same thing. When they click the submit button, we used the change contents action to change the contents of our question, which is the same as saying change the contents of what's in that question bucket, that question variable bucket. We set it to the value of what's in the first entry field, a comma and a space, what's in the second entry field, a comma and a space, and what's in the third entry field. And you can see here we have a fill-in-the-blank question that's looking for an answer of blue, comma, space, white, comma, space, red. So if this first variable, this first entry field value was equal to blue, and this second one was equal to white, and this third one was equal to red, then it would match what we're looking for in our question, and they would get it correct. Right? Same as if I had typed it in here myself. Right? If this is a fill-in-the-blank question and that's what we were looking for, I would get it correct. The only difference is I hid this from the student and used those entry fields to force it in. That's the type of thing that you can do using variables. As long as you understand what's going to be in the bucket, you can put in the bucket whatever you want. Again, we'll go into the AWT file and I'll show you this as well. Here's another example. In this example, I'm just using a variable to count. We've got these checkboxes here, and I want them to only be able to pick 3 checkboxes. So as they pick, I've got a bucket that I called count, and I put 1 in the bucket with the first one, and then I add to the variable with their next one. Now it equals 2. I add to the variable, I add 1 again to make it equal 3. Now that it equals 3, when they go to click, I say, oh, you know what? I'm not going to allow that to work anymore because it's already, my bucket already has 3, and I said I only want to allow you to equal 3. As long as if I deselect 1, count goes back to 2. I'm able to pick, goes back up to 3. So I'm just using a bucket here to count how many of these checkboxes are on. These are either on or empty. I count how many are on. Once the count equals 3, I force these to be empty. In other words, not selectable. And this just shows you, of course, what the question variable is seeing in it. We'll go under the hood for this too. This question, by the way, is also part of the Let's Cook sample title that's out on our website. You're welcome to go out to the website and grab that. There's also a blog, by the way, that I wrote about 2 months ago on the website as well that also talks about variables. That's a handy little resource. I hope that will be a good resource for you as well. Okay, here's another example where we're using variables. In this case, we're using variables to do some calculations. So we've got all these buildings, the Empire State Building, the Willis Tower, the Petronas Towers, etc. And we're going to guess how tall we think these buildings are. So I think these buildings are 5,000 inches tall. Let's see where that goes. Well, that's not very much. And you can see I've got this blue line. Well, what we did by using, remember, each of these entry fields has a variable. So when I click submit, all I did was run calculations against the value that was entered to determine the translation for all these other values. And based on that, I calculated a percentage of how far this line needs to go relative to the other pixel values on the page. And then just did a move action that says move this line to a Y position of whatever is calculated. So I have a variable Y position. So the move action says move this line to X coordinate, whatever this X coordinate is, and a variable Y coordinate. That's all that's happening here. So we're using the power of variables to make a little bit more interesting interaction for our learners. And then the last example I'll show you is something that people do with variables also. Oh wait, I forgot about this one. This one's interesting too. This is I have on an on-click of this box. It's going to change the size of the shape, change the height and change the width to a variable value. And this is an expanding collapsing menu that I created. So each of these buttons has a position on the screen, but if I expand one, it has to push all of them down. So again, I'm just using a move action, and in this case, I know that each of these is 25 pixels high, so if I click this to open it, it has to move 25, 50, 75, it has to move all of these 75 pixels down. So again, I have a variable Y value that I'm moving. If I open this one, it has to push everything below it 50 pixels down, and so on. So I'm just running some calculations in the background and moving all of these buttons up or down based on a variable Y value. This block here, I actually tied it to the value of whatever this location was and this location was for the height and the width. So as these move around, it would change the size of this block as well. So again, understanding what variables can do for you allow you to do a lot of different things. Move things around, change the size of things, force values into a question for a particular answer, keep count of things, and so on. And it would also allow you to do things like create games. So for example, in this tic-tac-toe game, if they get it correct, we're going to update a variable that says they have an O in this position. Well, how did we do that? Well, we created a user-defined variable. Well, it's tic-tac-toe, 3 in a row. How many rows are there? Well, there's a row here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 variables, and every time they fill a square in, correct or incorrect, we just update the appropriate variables. So because they got an O here, we update the row 1 variable and we update the row 4 variable by putting an O. Just add to variable O. If they get something wrong, we update those variables. So in this case, we updated row 1, 2. We updated the row 2 variable, add to variable X, and we updated the row 6 variable, add to variable X. Okay, and this just goes on, add to variable an X or an O until the game is won or lost. Well, how do we know it's won or lost? Because we added to variable every time they got something. So in this case, our variable 7, our row 7 variable, we added an O to it, and then later we added another O to it, and later we added another O. Anytime one of the variables equaled OOO or XXX, we know that it's a win or we know that it's a loss. By the way, we'll look at this in just a second, but I'll point out to you later, you can actually download this game. It's available for you to get and play with if you'd like. Okay, so let's go into Lectora and look at a couple of these things. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at here is the do if true page. Again, that's a great thing to keep in mind, do if true. Now I mentioned that when we ran this, we got the rectangle because we said show the rectangle if the radio group contained REC. It did not contain REC, the first time. It was blank, so we got the ellipse. If we wanted to change that, all we'd have to do is change this action. Instead of show rectangle if it contains REC only, we could say, or, I have to check my radio group 1, there it is, if it is empty. So now the first time they run this, it's empty, but they'll get the rectangle, if that's what you wanted. Once they make a choice, then they'll get the choice based on whatever choice they chose. Another way we could have done this, let me just take this out. Another way to do that, if you wanted to make sure you got the rectangle if it was blank, is very simply remember that radio groups have a variable associated with them as well. So all we have to do is come in here and for our rectangle, just say we want that one to be initially selected. If that is initially selected, then when they run it, our radio group variable already has the value of REC in it, so it would never be blank. So a couple different ways you could force it. As one of my friends used to say, in Lectora, all roads lead to Rome. There are always a number of different ways you can accomplish the same goal. Okay, so remember, do if true. Let's take a look at that custom question. Here's that question. Let me just do this. Let me uncover the little hider I had on the page, just so you can see what's going on. Okay, so the first thing, let's look at the question itself. It's just a plain old multiple choice question with an image, that stoplight image on the page. Nothing different there. If you had this in your title, it'd just be a regular multiple choice, and they'd choose red or yellow or green. What we did instead was we hid this red, yellow, green, and instead, on our little image, we put these nice buttons. And the action we have associated with those buttons, for example with the green, is when I click the green button, change the contents of my question to the word green. So it's just forcing in the same value that would be there if they had selected green in a normal question. Only it's a more interactive, more interesting way of answering the question. That's all it is. And by the way, this action, you may be wondering what this action is for. This is what I was saying before about if you want to be able to visualize what's in your variable. This action is just saying, change this value here to whatever my question 3 is holding so I can make sure it's working correctly. Obviously, I wouldn't need that in a real title. So that's what's happening here. Piece of cake. Same thing with the multiple blank fill in the blank question. It's doing the exact same thing. We have a fill in the blank question where we're looking for an answer of blue, white, red. That's all. And by the way, it's not case sensitive. So if they typed in uppercase or lowercase, it would not matter in this particular case. Fill in the blank questions are the only thing in Lectora that is not case sensitive. So let's get this out of the way. Where is that? So if they put in blue, white, red, all we're doing when they click the submit button is forcing whatever's in these 3 fields, the first one, the second one, the third one, separated by a comma and a space. We're just forcing that into our question variable. And the reason we're separating it by a comma and a space is because in our question, we're looking for that answer to be separated by a comma and space. And the only reason we did that, by the way, was so it looked nice on our test results. We could take those out if we wanted to. But that's all. Because we know what Lectora is going to be looking for in the bucket as a correct answer, we just force whatever they pick into that bucket to do a little bit more interesting question. Here's where we're doing the counting. It's a little more complicated, but I'll just show you. I think I can show you a quick action here. Here's where we're counting. Whenever they click this checkbox, we're going to add to our count variable 1 if the checkbox is not empty. In other words, if they're turning it on, we add 1. If it is empty, we're going to subtract 1. So we add 1 if they turn it on, we subtract 1 if they turn it off, just check that count. If the count equals 3, we don't allow any more. Here's the little building example with the variable move. There's a lot going on in here. As you can see, when they click a button, we have to do all these calculations, right? We have to convert. If they enter feet, we have to convert feet to inches and centimeters and so on. But that's just math. Again, that's just running modify variable actions, setting it equal, and then converting it by multiplying or dividing or whatever we have to do to convert it. We're taking what's in one bucket and multiplying it by some value to get the other result. And then we have a move action that just says, once you've done that, determine how that number relates to the overall total, convert that to a percentage, and then move our line that percentage of pixel values. Like I said, it's a little more complicated, but it's again, it's just math. Same thing here. There are a lot of actions in here. As you can see, it's just move actions, and it says move it to the variable y position. We calculate those variable y positions up here by adding 25 or subtracting 25 if they click it on or click it off. Again, it's just math, then taking that variable value and using it to do something else with it. And then the same with the game, and I mentioned this earlier. When we score the game, now let's see where that is. Every time they get a question right or wrong, we're adding to a variable for each row. And then all we have to do is look and see they won the game if any row has 0, 0, 0 or 0, 0, 0 in it. And they've lost the game if any of the row variables have x, x, x in them. So it scores basically just like you play it in real life. Add to variable an x, or add to variable an o, and you're going to end up with strings like xox and oxo, and none of those matter until you get an xxx or an oo. So I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. Again, what I wanted to point out, though, was sort of the main things you do with variables, right? You've got reserved variables and user-defined variables. You've got form objects and questions. All of those contain variables in them, and you can use that information to do a lot of different things in Lectora. So again, I appreciate everyone stopping in and seeing us. Please come back for future Inspiration Wednesday sessions. If you have a question that we were not able to get to today, or something that clicks into your head a little bit later, feel free to go to our support group, send it on to support, and if they can't answer it, then I'm sure they'll get in touch with Jamie or myself, and we'll get back with you. So again, thank you for joining us for another Inspiration Wednesday. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you're not afraid to go play around with variables and try some different things. Remember that they are global, so no matter where they are in your title, you can use them in other places or look in that bucket anyplace else. Thank you for joining, folks. Have a terrific afternoon.